Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 39B, LC-39B. Launch Complex 39B, LC-39B, is the second of Launch Complex 39's three launch pads, located at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, KSC, in Merritt Island, Florida. The pad, along with Launch Complex 39A, LC-39A, was first designed for the Saturn V launch vehicle, which at the time was the United States' most powerful rocket. Typically used to launch NASA's crewed spaceflight missions since the late 1960s, the pad is currently configured for use by the agency's Space Launch System, SLS, rocket, a shuttle-derived launch vehicle which is currently used in the Artemis program and subsequent Moon-to-Mars campaigns. The pad had also been leased by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, to aerospace company Northrop Grumman, for use as a launch site for their shuttle-derived Omega launch vehicle, for National Security Space Launch, NSSL, flights and commercial launches, before the Omega program was cancelled. National Security Space Launch, NSSL, is a program of the United States Space Force, USSF, intended to assure access to space for United States Department of Defense, DoD, and other United States government payloads. The program is managed by the Assured Access to Space Directorate, SSCAA, of the Space Force's Space Systems Command, SSC, in partnership with the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO. The NSSL program launches the nation's most valuable military satellites. Contracts to launch lower-value payloads, such as those of the Space Test Program, STP, are awarded using different methodologies. In 1961, President John Kennedy proposed to Congress the goal of landing a man on the Moon by the end of the decade. Congressional approval led to the launch of the Apollo program, which required a massive expansion of NASA operations, including an expansion of launch operations from the Cape to adjacent Merritt Island to the north and west. Launch Complex 39B was designed to handle launches of the Saturn V rocket, the largest and most powerful launch vehicle, which would propel Apollo spacecraft to the Moon. Launch Complex 39B's inaugural launch on May 18, 1969 was also that of the only Saturn V to launch from the pad, SA-505, used to launch the Apollo 10 mission, Command and Service Module, CSM, Charlie Brown and Lunar Module, LM, Snoopy. After the Apollo 17 mission in December 1972, Launch Complex 39B was used for Saturn 1B launches. The mobile launchers were then modified for the Saturn 1B rocket, by adding a milk stool extension platform to the launch pedestal, so that the S-4B upper stage and Apollo spacecraft swing arms would reach their targets. These were used for 3 crewed Skylab flights and the Apollo, Soyuz, since the Saturn 1B Launch Complex 34, LC-34, and Space Launch Complex 37, SLC-37, at Cape Canaveral had been decommissioned. With the advent of the Space Shuttle program in the early 1980s, the original structure of the launch pads was remodeled for the needs of the Space Shuttle. Launch Complex 39A hosted all Space Shuttle launches until January 28, 1986, when Space Shuttle Challenger would become the first to launch from Launch Complex 39B during the ill-fated STS-51L mission, which ended with the destruction of Challenger and the death of the mission's crew a minute into the flight. Launch Complex 39B hosted 53 Space Shuttle launches until on December 10, 2006, when Discovery launched from the pad for the final time during the STS-116 mission. The program's remaining flights launched from Launch Complex 39A. To support the final shuttle mission to the Hubble Space Telescope, HST, STS-125 launched from Launch Complex 39A on May 11, 2009, Endeavour was placed on Launch Complex 39B if needed to launch the STS-400 rescue mission. Launch Complex 39B would subsequently be reconfigured for crewed Ares 1 launches as part of the Constellation program. The Ares 110 mission launched a prototype Ares 1 from LC-39B on October 28, 2009, prior to the program's cancellation the following year. On November 16, 2022, at 6 hours 47 minutes and 44 seconds Coordinated Universal Time, the Space Launch System, SLS, was launched from Launch Complex 39B as part of the Artemis 1 mission. After the Ares 110 test flight in 2009, NASA removed the Fixed Service Structure, FSS, from Launch Complex 39B, returning the location to an Apollo-like, clean pad designed for the first time since 1977. This approach is intended to make the complex available to multiple types of vehicles that will arrive at the pad with service structures on the mobile launcher platform, as opposed to using fixed structures on the pad. The liquid hydrogen liquid oxygen, LH2, LOX, and water tanks used for the sound suppression system are the only structures left from the Space Shuttle era. In 2014, NASA announced that it would make Launch Complex 39B available to commercial users during times when it is not needed by the Space Launch System. NASA subsequently agreed to allow Orbital ATK Company to use Launch Complex 39B for their Omega launch vehicle. However, Northrop Grumman Corporation, who absorbed Orbital ATK in June 2018, cancelled the development of Omega in September 2020 before any launches had taken place. Space Launch System will therefore remain the only user of Launch Complex 39B for the foreseeable future. As of November 2022, Launch Complex 39B manages the Space Launch System's processing and launch operations, as part of the first phase of a 5-phase project, were being completed. The second phase of this project is currently budgeted for $89.2 million.